All right, everyone, welcome back. So this next piece is, I call it Reports as an Advocacy Tool. Also, hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Murray, and I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Association of Child Advocate Programs. So Reports as an Advocacy Tool, common items you might want to start including in your reports. All right, so here's why. So here's where I got some of the information for this section. And I'll just put out there, none of the program people have seen this yet. And they'll probably be like, Ryan, why did you include this thing? Or what about this thing? Or we need more details here. This is just the start of a conversation, y'all. But so here's where we got all of these. Here's where I came up with these lists for you to kind of think about things that you might want to start including in your reports. Regional program meetings. So one of the activities that I did with the programs in some of these areas is basically said, what are things that you include in your report, or what are things that you want to see in a guardian ad litem report? So I had them write down one idea on each sticky, and then we put all these stickies up on the wall, and then we organized them into categories so that we could kind of see a little bit more. And so what you're seeing here are some of the results of these sticky things. And all of my program staff know how much I love these things, because it's so much easier to take the data and move it around so that we get a better sense. The other source of these checklist items from sample reports. So I got sample GAL reports or CASA reports from Chelan, Yakima, Pierce, Lewis, Thurston, Snohomish, I guess another one from Lewis, San Juan, and Island. So basically taking all of these programs report templates and just pulling out the good things. And I'll just say that nobody had the perfect report template, as much as everybody, when I asked them for the report template, tells me how great theirs is, or we just reviewed ours and the judge loves this report. All of them had things that I thought, oh, that's an interesting little thing over here. That is something we might want to include. The other place that we got information for this report are, so in this summer, we did a report. I asked the judges just for feedback. How are we doing? What do you want to see the advocates including? What do you want to hear them talking about? What do you want them to do? And so the results of that report can be found here. I just put a link to that in chat. And just so you know, that report, we got about 60 judges to respond to that from all over the state. It's kind of awesome. And then all of their comments on each of the individual sections are there too. I highly encourage you to look at that. When you get a chance, it's just, there's some really good feedback from judges on there about our advocacy and what we need to do better, what's working. So that's another place where we got some of the ideas for these checklist items that I'm going to be showing you. And then finally, this conference. I've been listening to all the speakers as they come along, and as they've been suggesting things and pieces like that. For example, there's some stuff in here about resilience that we heard from Dee Wilson on Friday. There's some pieces about hope that we heard yesterday from Dr. Hellman. So anytime there was something where I was like, ooh, that's something that we need to start thinking about including in our reports, I threw that on this list as well. So this is kind of a hodgepodge, and why I say I'm still kind of developing this. I just want to put that out there, as this is kind of like not a rough draft. This is a final draft, but kind of to show you all as well. Questions so far? Okay. So in general and overall, always check with your program manager first about including things or including new elements that you hadn't thought about first, right? So just say, hey, I do not say, you are not allowed to say, Ryan said to do this ever, because I get program phone calls calling me, did you really say this? Or what are you thinking, Ryan? That's not what I'm telling you here. These are just things to suggest. Talk with your program about before any of these things. You start thinking about including them or just adding them and seeing what your program responds. And in general and overall, avoid long narratives. We talked about this when we're talking about emails, but the same thing goes for your reports as well. Judges get lost in long narratives. I don't know that if you've ever seen, you probably haven't. So when judges go home before a dependency docket or commissioners or any time, they take home a stack of reading that looks about this high, because they're going to be hearing about 20 different cases at some point, even if it's 10, and depending on how much, they're reading a lot of material, and they're usually reading I'm sorry, I'm responding. Are the judges' tips in the handout link? No, they're not in that one. The judges' tips are in the link. I just posted it above. So, oh wait, that was the handouts one. Sorry, you're right. Thank you, Rochelle. I copied the wrong URL. There you go. There's the judges one. Sorry about that, guys. Judges have to read a lot. And so you want to make sure that you make your job, one of your jobs is to make your reading to them in an easily accessible way so that they get your point. So to help that, use section headers to orient, right? And I've got we'll have to talk some suggestions of section headers, or use your report template, the one that your program has already given you. Try to use bullets and tables when you can. Judges love them. They have to read so much. It's so much easier for them to just look at a table, right? A really concise way of displaying information, or even bullet points, right? They love those. And like Tracy was saying earlier too, simple sentence construction, right? See, what is it? See Dick run, run Dick run, see Jane play Jane play, like that kind of stuff. It really helps them it helps you convey your message to them. And then finally, check about page length. But in general, I would say what I was just in talking with folks, 5 pages for, your standard review hearing where there isn't a lot of issues going back and forth. That's probably enough in what you're kind of wanting to shoot for. If you've got a really involved case and you've got a lot of nuance about a particular aspect of it, that's good. But 5 pages is probably at the max of what a judge wants to see for a review hearing. But your judicial officers may vary. So if your program's getting feedback about how great and how thorough the program's reports are, that means to me that the judges want longer, and they're fine with that. Go for it. Yeah. All right, so let's go through some of these elements. So first page elements, these are kind of the things that just like kind of help set the scene for the judicial officer. So that first page is like, okay, what am I getting into here? What am I getting into here? So and most of the templates are really good about this, but if they're not, or if you're seeing something on this list that's not in your template, maybe talk to your program. I'll be talking to them as well, but here we go. Child's names and date of birth, right? Who are the characters? How long has the child been in care in months, right? So how long has this case been open? The current placement and how long that the kid has been at that placement. The current social worker and how long that social worker has been on the case, because the social workers aren't going to say that. You're going to be the source of that information to the court. And then the number of social workers since the beginning of the case. Just a number. Another thing that judges, Tracy, go ahead.
Well, so I will say that the number of social workers on the case, just to throw it out there, could be challenging because I guess I would, if I had a report to me submitted that way, I'd want some clarity around it, because there's been often a CPS worker, a FAR worker, like, are you talking CFWS workers? We have a core filing worker. So again, going back to what I was saying in regards to data, like it could skew what you're wanting to relay to the court. So are you talking about number of social workers since, like, CFWS, right? That's the worker that's working the dependency case. If they're already on their fourth worker of that, like that is an issue or could be an issue, as opposed to if they are on their fourth worker, but you're including the CPS worker and you're including the FAR worker and you're including the court worker, like that to me is different. So again, it goes back to being clear if you're going to use information like that, what it looks like, because that could be, I could see the department getting upset and making that a bigger deal than it needs to be. So I just throw that out there.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah. Thanks, Janet. Yeah, but sometimes the court really likes it. So I'm just saying these are suggestions and these are things that I've heard from judges too. And we've heard from across the state, like, wow, social worker turnover is a big deal. And that does have an impact on the case, right? And kind of the consistency of the services to the family. So just putting that out there as things that you might want to know.
And Ryan, Ryan, to that point, like that's one of those things that I would use to be persuasive, right? Like if you are in a case that's delayed, you're 12 months in, you're 14 months in, and there's been no progress made, like that's when I would want an advocate to start talking about how many social workers they've gone through. Is if it's impacting the case moving forward.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, exactly. Reason to know. So this is another thing that's on the tip of a lot of the judicial officers' minds these days. There was a recent Supreme Court of Washington case that basically said, if there is reason to know that a child may be Native American or that may be where ICWA applies, and Tracy, don't unmute on this one. Just let me go. Okay. If there is reason to know, there is a different standard of social work that needs to be applied to the case from that point forward until the tribe writes back and says either yay or nay. But until the tribe in question makes that decision, there is a different standard of social work that needs to be applied. And quite frankly, a higher standard of review that the court is going to be undergoing. It's the difference between active efforts from the department and reasonable efforts. Active in the cases of, so when there's reason to know, the caseload standard or the casework standard is active efforts versus if the case is not ICWA involved, reasonable efforts. And that impacts federal funding for that case. So if there's reason to know the child may be Native, that's one of those front page issues. So that way the court, as they're reviewing the rest of the report, knows that they need to be applying that lens versus a reasonable effort lens. Obviously, the date the report was written and submitted, that's usually includes stamped right there on the filing date, but just if that's helpful to the court to know how old and how relevant or how new this report is. Another one, is an interpreter or translation needed, and what language? Meaning, for this hearing, do we need to have interpreters come in? And that could be, and what language, including sign language, just so the court has an idea of, again, as judges are reading these reports, they're thinking, okay, what about what's my docket going to look like tomorrow, right? From a structural piece. And so knowing whether or not that they have to have interpreters called and getting that all squared away, that helps. And I just thought of another one. Okay. And then obviously too, and these will vary depending on where your report templates is, and just go with that. But also that's important to the court to know is people you've spoken with and what files you've reviewed. All the templates I saw had that somewhere within the report. That's great. And then the last piece too is a summary, and I really like this kind of setup. Since the last review hearing, just a brief paragraph of kind of what's been going on, not the full-blown narrative, just like the substantial changes, basically saying it's your introductory paragraph. Here's what we're going to be talking about. Questions so far or questions on the first page elements? Anyone? The chat screen is hidden. There we go. How does it all fit on one page? It probably doesn't. Thank you, Catherine. But especially when you're doing captions and stuff like that. But it's just, these are kind of like the highlight pieces for, yeah. All right, let's keep going. Oh, so now we're going to be diving into like the report format pieces. And so I put these all in headings, right? So about each of these headings, and the way that I've structured this is that under each heading, they're going to be kind of common elements that are really simple to answer. And you'll see this as we go through. So I kind of put those at the beginning under the heading. Basically, okay, talking about the kid, here's some vitals, or here's some key things that courts need to know. Then there's a little bit of a narrative. And then at the end of that narrative, recommendations or conclusions. And again, all of this is just kind of thinking about in terms of structure, elements to consider adding, not mandatory. Because there's a lot. And so in some of your cases, some of these are going to be more relevant than others. But almost thinking of this checklist as a checklist or like a list of things. Oh, did I talk about this, or is this relevant? That's kind of how I'm going about this. All right, so let's start with the kid. Demographics. How old is the kid? What's the race? Things like that, right? Are they legally free? Meaning, have parental rights been terminated to both parents? Dates, locations, and durations of your visits. So that's setting up how much contact you've had with the child and letting the court know how seriously to take your information, right? If you said, I visited the child once in the past 6 months, that's one thing. If you say, I visited, or you show or display, I visited the child once a month, here are the different locations and the duration of each, that lets the court know exactly, wow, this person knows this kid. Picture of the child. And this is one of those things that you definitely want to talk to your program about, because every program has different ways that they want this picture. They have different thoughts. They have a bunch of feels about pictures of kids. So you're going to want to check with your program first before you just go around and start taking Polaroids of kids on your caseload. Number one, try not to take it yourself, right? Ask either the caregiver or the parents or somebody other than you to ask them for a picture of the child. And where you can, think about have it only be,
Brian?
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Why is that that we can't take the picture of the child?
Bias, right? You don't want, because what you choose, it's basically like you're writing, a picture's worth 1,000 words, Janet. Depending on how, if you take the picture, then however that kid is showing up or who's in the picture or where it is, it's letting it may let bias creep in that here's what I want the court to see. And if you get that information from somebody else, you can just say, here's a picture submitted by the caregiver, for example, or here's a picture that mom took during a visit.
Okay. So what I usually try to do each visit, I take a close-up of the child and then I take a full picture, and all my reports are like that each visit. So not to do that then is what I'm hearing.
No, remember I said these are all suggestions. So if what is working for you, Janet, is working for you, keep doing it. And if somebody said don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I like that idea of like that really close in picture too, because then that way, one of the other things, and this is the second point, maybe thinking about having it only be the child in the frame.
Right, right.
Because then that way the other caregivers don't, like, you don't want mom saying there they are with the caregiver and they look really happy or they look really sad.
Okay.
That's what you're trying to avoid in that really close up picture. You're exactly, Janet.
Okay, thank you.
Or even if,
clear.
yeah, or even if you've got a dad and a mom, right? Like then you get into that competition as well. Like, why is the picture of mom? Like, why did they pick mom's picture and not dad's picture? Like all of that stuff. So, and then possibly, maybe even instead, what about a school picture, right? A very neutral setting, a school picture, or maybe something that they took with friends, something that doesn't show people who are responsible for taking care of this kid. But surprisingly enough, I think a lot of our judges in particular really like it when you guys include a picture. That didn't always used to be the case. At one point, we got some really strong feedback from some of the judges. Quit putting pictures on these things. I don't want to see the kid. But thankfully, I think those old curmudgeons have long since retired. And now people actually do want to see the pictures of the people that they're serving. So, and then these last 3 bullet points, and these could be included in the demographics, but these last 3 in particular are for older kids or LGBTQ kids, right? What are their preferred pronouns? What's their preferred name or nickname? And then the sex and the gender identification of the child as well. When we are working, especially with older youth who are coming out or, saying, I'm trans or LGBTQ, it's really important that the court knows what the kid's preferred pronouns are, what their preferred name is, and that we're very clear that this is what the child prefers to be called and how the child prefers to be referenced. What the court does with that information is a whole other story. But as the child's advocate, it's important that we let the court know what the child wants and where the child is with those. Questions so far? Okay. More about the child. Is there an attorney appointed? And if the child is over 12, have you asked the child if the child would like one? So making sure that you document that. Had this conversation with the kid that's over 12-year-old, because that's a statutory piece that we need to do. Medical, dental, and mental health. Talk about maybe their most recent appointments, if there's any diagnoses or long-term prognoses, or further recommendations about those areas. If the child's on any medications and what those are, both for like mental health diagnoses or just general medical ones. And are there any behavioral concerns that might need to be addressed through therapy? And this is a big one too. Strengths of the child. What strengths does the child think that they have? Like, what are they good at? When you ask them, what are you good at? What do they say? This is another thing to ask the other adults when you're talking with them too. And it's also kid-focused advocacy. What do you see as Johnny's strengths? What do you see as Susie's strengths? Put those in your report as well. And feel free to ask mom, dad, caregivers, relatives, right? The reason being is that we've heard reports from kids as they get through this system that so much of what is said about them is what's wrong with them. And you can imagine going back through and they just become what they think is happening. And quite frankly, it probably is what's happening. We are looking at these children as a problem to solve rather than what's already working. What's good about these kids? Kids in foster care are really sensitive about being labeled by their deficits rather than their strengths. So as their advocate, you need to make sure that you're coming at this from a strengths perspective. The other thing is, and this is from Dee's presentation on Friday, as a way to kind of nurture resilience for our kids, is doing a talent search of them and for them. What are they good at? And how do we nurture this? That's something that oftentimes gets lost, especially with older kids or kids that have been in the system for a while. This idea of what are they good at and how can we help them? Questions so far? All right, connections. So you're kind of filling out where this kid is and kind of giving the court perspective about what access to connections this kid has. This is a big one. Actually, these next two are really big. Resilient adult figure. Again, one of the ways that kids bounce back from being in foster care or show resiliency is that one caring adult in their life. Putting it in there, putting that in your report so that the court knows that we've got this resilience factor and that we're looking for it. Here's who this person is. That way too, if you get hit by a bus and your advocacy gets lost, or we have to assign another advocate on there, we know that gives that advocate, and they're going through your old reports, they know that there's this resilience factor there. Current primary attachment figure. Does the kid have one? Because that lets us all know if we have to transfer that attachment or have to move that child, and there is that who is that kid's primary attachment figure? How do we work them into that process? It could be a parent, could be a caregiver, could be a relative, but who is that primary attachment figure? Who does that kid see as a source, especially for the younger kids? Aside from visits, how are they connected to the parents? What's that connection look like? We're going to be getting visit notes. What we need you to bring and what the court needs you to bring is filling out the rest of that picture. How are the parents parenting, even though they're not available to be a full-time parent? How are they connected to their siblings? Any connections to extended biological family or family culture? How are they connecting with their peers? Connection to racial identity. I know a lot of times we whitewash that idea with culture, but I want to be really clear. Kids have a race, right? And how are they connected to their racial identity? Not just culture, not just going to an MLK march, right? If they're Black, but how are the kids relating to their cultural identity or racial identity? And what connections do they have to support that? And then connections to other aspects of the child's identity, their sexual orientation or gender identity expression, their religion, other aspects of their culture, but thinking about it from that lens as well. How are we doing so far? We good? And then we've got the education section. Does the kid have a 504 or an IEP? If there was a placement change, did we do, or what's the status of the best interest determination regarding school placement? I don't have a lot of time to go into that today, but we do have a session on that. I believe it's Friday afternoon. Or is it tomorrow afternoon? It's one of the afternoons. But this idea that whenever a child changes schools, the schools need to have a communication and an agreement about whether it's in the child's best interest to stay at the old school or transition to the new school. And that needs to be child focused, not at the convenience of the adults in the case. Yeah, Denise, I recognize that this is a lot to put in a report, but again, thinking about this as are we covering these things, or like, are these issues in the case? Might be a better way to think about it that way too. And 5 kids, you're going to have 5 cover pages, and that's pretty much the end of all the court wants to hear. Just joking. But right, yeah, it is a lot to put in a report. But again, just answering yes or no a lot of times too. School attendance. And again, this is only a problem if it's an issue, right? But it's more than just attendance. Are they showing up to school on time? And do they have a way to get to school reliably? Are they involved in any extracurriculars? How are their grades? Are they on track to be promoted? Do they have an educational liaison? So somebody from Treehouse, and who that is. And if the court has made this determination, who the education decision maker is on the case. And then finally, when we're talking about kids, what are the kid's stated wishes? Always include that in your report. What's the kid want? We should ask. And then any recommendations you have, and I highly suggest that you prioritize them based on Maslow's hierarchy. And here's a copy of that for you. But right, start at the bottom and work your way up. If the kid's having issues accessing food, water, warmth, or rest, that's a problem that the court needs to know about. Likewise, safety, security, making your recommendations based on these and helping you prioritize these and help you, just as you're thinking about what do I really need the court to know about, start from the bottom of this and work your way up. For example, you don't want to be advocating for oboe lessons for the child when they are not getting enough food, or they're bouncing from home to home. Like, use this Maslow's hierarchy as a way to kind of prioritize your recommendations. That's kid stuff. Placement. Current placement, how long they've been there. What type of placement is it? And by that we mean, is it a foster home? Is it stranger care? Is it a relative? Kind of what type of placement is it, right? Fictive kin, those sorts of things. Are they placed with siblings? And how long? And is this a potential source of permanence? Right? Now, if you're brand new into the case, that's not really a relevant question. But if we're 3 years into the case and the kid's been with that placement for 3 years, is this placement willing to be a permanent solution, whether that be a guardianship or an adoption? But at the beginning, please don't ask on your first day when you go and see your kid in their emergency shelter or the emergency foster care, are you willing to be an adoptive resource? I guarantee you the relatives or the emergency people are not going to be able to answer that question. And they probably may be scared by it. But if you're getting towards the end of a case and we need to start thinking about, how's this case going to end? That's a valid question. And if you have a lot of transitions for this kid, if you unfortunately have a lot of transitions for this kid, putting them in a table like this really lets the court know kind of what they're dealing with. And I actually pulled this table from one of the GAL reports that I found. The one piece that I did add is this idea of whether or not that transition that occurred between was planned or unplanned. Right? Did we yank that kid from that placement and move him into the other one, or was it planned? because that's one of the things that that's one of the research items or research points that comes up routinely. It's not necessarily about the number of placements. What's more detrimental to children is the number of unplanned transitions.
Ryan,
Yes.
could you, would you be willing to break that out a little bit more for me? Because I've had cases where I've had kids get moved really quickly. And it was a quote unquote planned transition in that we knew that it was coming and had to happen. Or was an emergency type situation. And I'm just curious if you could define those a little bit better.
I'd be happy to, Sarah. And in fact, I did a whole session on that exact subject last week. And so it's also on YouTube. So if you, because this is the thing, this is one of the advocacy pieces that I want you guys to start thinking about. Slowing down these transitions when we can. If it's not an emergency, we need to start thinking about how we as advocates can start advocating for planned transition, like actual planning when it comes to moving a child from one home to the next. Not just who's going to pick that kid up and drop them off, but thinking about how we introduce caregivers, how we introduce the new folks, what that relationship, what that handoff is going to look like. So there's a full like 2 hours of that, Sarah.
Thank you.
No problem. Other questions? Okay. Items about placement. Is there a caregiver report and was that submitted? And did you have a chance to look at it? Right? Letting the court know. Here's the other reason why I'm telling you some of these like yes or no things. A lot of times, some of the feedback that we heard from the judicial survey is that they turn to the CASA report or the advocate's report first. Right? So you want to kind of lay out like, yep, there's a caregiver report. You might want to look for that. Has there been any news or work on potential new placements? So for example, a relative came forward and they're thinking that they might want to be a placement, right? Letting the court know, hey, heads up, this relative came forward and we're researching about whether or not that's a good placement. And if so, we'll be putting forward a transition plan, or we'll be working on a transition plan for that to happen. Does the placement have any needs? Right? Are they struggling? Do they need respite? What do they need? Are they getting respite? And who's providing it? Right? And then again, current caregivers' willingness to be a permanent placement, if that's where the case is going. Those are common placement pieces. Questions? Thoughts? All right. About the parents. So here's some of those yes, no questions, right? Has paternity been established? This is one, especially if you're near a military base. What's the military status of any of the parents? Are they active? Did they serve? There are different rules and laws that apply to those that are in the military. Is there DV? Is DV an issue on the case? What's the primary language spoken in the home? And are there any special or unique needs of the parent? Janet, yes, we are going to get a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm also working on a Word document too, just so that you have that to kind of go through as you're going through the different sections. I think that actually might be more useful to you all too. But I started with a Word document, then I was copying into the, anyway, I need to revise the Word document a little bit more because it was just kind of my scratch notes. Okay, about the parents. And again, to Tracy's point earlier, start with strengths. Say at least one thing positive, more if you're able. Parents are going to be reading these reports. And if you just dog them the whole time, they're going to get really quickly and start thinking really quickly, this person is not on my side. And it just makes your case that much harder. Start with something positive. And it could be something really, really minor. Mom brought snacks to the visit. But also have it be in reference to the child, right? Like, because you're the child advocate, but thinking about what is something that this parent displayed that was positive for the child. So potential areas, natural community supports, right? They're really well connected. They're doing well in treatment. Any family connections. And any pieces of hope that they're bringing to the situation, right? Like start from that hope perspective. Give them a pat on the back. And then from there, again, I want to get us out of this habit of focusing on all the negative things that they've done, but instead talking about ways that they've helped the child. So this is a big one for me. Have they displayed any opportunities? Have they been given or displayed any opportunity of parenting that are non-visit related? How have they been a parent even though they don't have custody of their kid? How are the current caregivers and parents working together? Are they? How is that connection being nurtured for the benefit of the child? What are the current barriers preventing reunification? What are the next step towards reunification? And then what's preventing a return home today? Why can't the kids go home? So that's kind of the parenting thing, or parenting. And the next piece is talking about the case plan. So progress on the case plan. Do the parents, DCYF, caregivers understand what the court expects of them? Do all elements of the case plan have a desired statement of impact? And I'm going to put this all together so it gives you a way of reframing things too. And then are there any causes for delay or barriers in achieving any elements of the case plan? And why I want to talk about this is this idea of compliance and progress. And why I put UGG underneath it. Because those two things are a horrible way of evaluating whether or not a parent can be with their kid. Because so much of what we focus on, and the court gets in this habit too, and sometimes they're just as bad at it, is thinking that doing your complying with services is achieving a goal. So for example, if the parent has an addiction and we say, go to drug and alcohol counseling, the goal isn't to get through drug and alcohol counseling. The goal is sobriety. Those services are a step towards achieving them. We need to start thinking about how are we achieving, we need to report on how are we getting closer to that goal of sobriety, not whether or not they went through treatment. Treatment is an avenue to get there, right? The goal is sobriety. Because how many times, a great example of this one too is parenting classes, right? We pretty much order every parent to go through parenting classes. They go through them and then we watch them or we talk to them and we're like, that didn't sink in. Or depending on the training that the parents are going through, there are a variety of reasons why parenting classes aren't necessarily good, because our goal, right, is to make sure that this parent can successfully parent. Classes are one way that they get there. But we have got, how many times have you had a parent go through those classes and we still say they're compliant, but they're not making progress? That's because, it's not because they're failing, it's because that service isn't the one that they needed. Exactly, Denise. So making sure that when we're talking about progress on the case plan, that we're talking about progress towards the actual goal, being a good parent, being clean and sober, being able to safely be with their kids. That's what we need to be talking about. And using the services as a means to get there. And there's a really good, if you guys go back and watch one video from this training, from this series of conferences, watch the motivational interviewing one from yesterday. He talks about this very issue, and it's actually compliance. We're not seeking compliance, we're seeking behavior modification. And compliance is a horrible way to measure whether or not that behavior modification is happening. Now, I recognize that a lot of folks get caught up in this too. And these are a lot, and so programs are going to be saying, nope, you got to talk about compliance and progress because that's the language that everybody uses. But the way to think about that too, I'm encouraging us all to start thinking about how are we getting them to their goal that they're wanting to achieve, not measuring whether or not they're doing what we told them to do. Questions about that? I think that this is actually a whole other training too that I did earlier. So that's why I say compliance and progress. Ugh, it's a horrible way of measuring what we're doing. But courts need to see that. All right, family time. Again, thinking about family time from the perspective of the child, not the parents. So what's the current safety analysis? If you aren't familiar with that, good Lord, I feel like that's all I've been doing last year is doing safety planning trainings. Happy to do that for your program again. Are the parents able to fully engage in family time? Are they engaging? So that's where you do kind of like the attendance roster. You know, they were offered 10 visits, they made it to 6. We offered them 10, they came to all 10. They're asking for more, you know, those sorts of things. Are the parents engaging with their kid? Are they engaging in are they using the family time to their full advantage? If not, why not? This is a big one. Are any observations made by visitation providers similar to yours? So if you're getting visit notes, are what they reporting jiving with what you may have observed when that one time you went there? Right? What we're trying to determine is whether or not the court can rely on those visitation notes as an accurate accounting of what's going on. A brief description of current visitations. What do they look like? Where are they being held? who's participating, like fill that out for the court so that they get an understanding of what a visit looks like from the kid's perspective. They don't know.
Ryan, question.
Yeah.
How, if we're looking at the visitation reports and the visits are unsupervised, there's really not going to be a lot from the supervisor, the visit
Yeah.
supervisor. So how do we handle that?
We don't have any data. So our ability to assess how well a parent is able to parent isn't going to come from unsupervised visits. We're going to have to find other ways. So Janet, what I'm challenging you to think about is, how are we giving this parent the opportunity to display what parenting looks like, even though they don't have custody?
That's hard. So, well, you can say they're showing up at the visits with the child, no?
Think about visits. Janet, do you have children?
I do. I have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren.
Do your adult children live with you?
One does right now temporarily.
Okay. For the other 2, are you still parenting the other 2 that aren't living with you?
I am, yeah.
You don't have custody of them though, and they don't live with you? How would
No.
we know that?
Yeah, I just know what's going on in their lives.
Uh-huh.
So talking to the parent and,
Asking about the kid.
okay,
What do you know about what's going on in their life? You see what I mean?
okay.
Basically ask yourself, how am I a good grandparent? And use that to measure, oh, how is this parenting? How is this parent parenting, even though those children don't live with them?
Okay. Like they would know what's going on in school with the kid. No?
Yeah, no, that's
Oh,
great.
okay.
What do they know about the child? And like, how are they interfacing with the child?
Got it. Thank you.
Because, and I'll just say this too, visitations are a horrible way to measure a parent's ability to parent. And for that diatribe, but we talk about that during the safety training too. When my child was 14, he could safely be with a kid of any age for 2 hours in a supervised visitation. That does not measure it. That visitation setting is not measuring his ability to parent a child. And Janet, asking the parents what parenting means to them. What's it like to be a parent? What does being a parent mean to you, parent? Okay, moving on. Sorry. Child before and after the family time, what the impact of the family time is on them and their behaviors. That's a big complaint that we get from foster parents in particular. Oh my gosh, these kids are so wound up after visits, right? But that's another area we don't want these placements to blow. So let's talk about maybe those placements need some coaching on how to bring a kid, how to wind a kid down from a visit with their parents. Maybe that's a resource that they need. So not only how the in-person visits are going, but what about virtual? Are they doing FaceTime? Are they checking in with the kid? Right? Including that as part of the family time piece of the parenting assessment. A lot of our parents, they can do more and they can be more available than just when they show up for visits. During the pandemic, we were hearing all kinds of stories how parents were parenting, even though they didn't have custody. They were reading bedtime stories to their kids each night over FaceTime. They were doing morning prayers or evening prayers, morning prayers, saying grace. Just those 10-minute check-ins over virtual platforms. Helping with homework. Right? How could visits be made better for the child and all involved? And what about sibling visits and connections? How are the siblings participating at the visits? Questions about family time. All right, extended family. Dates of the most recent relative search that the department has conducted. What languages do they speak? So that we make sure that we're sending them the right information in the right language when the department's doing those relative searches. It does us no good to do a relative search where the department sends a letter in English and they speak Cambodian at home. Any relatives who have responded and what they're willing to provide, whether that be, it could be placement, but it could also be, we'll help check in. You know, what are they willing to do to help this kid? We'll drive them to an appointment once a week. We'll host a dinner once a month or something like that. What are they willing to do? Supervise visits, be a visit resource. Status of any background checks and home studies for relatives who have come forward. Family dynamics, if they're important. Mom gets along well with the her mom, but fights with the, is having difficulties with the paternal mother. Things like that, just so the court's aware. And then what does the extended family supports look like for the child? ICWA. Should active efforts be applied? We already talked about that one. I would also highly, highly, highly encourage you to start keeping track of the people and family members you've asked and their response to, is there any Native American ancestry? The status of any inquiries to the tribe, if the social worker hasn't provided those already. And then also any contacts that you've had with the child's tribe on behalf of the child. So for those of you that missed it, but we had a presentation on ICWA on last Wednesday morning, and the representative of the tribe was saying, I rarely get contacted by advocates like you guys. Reach out to those tribes, let them know. And this is what they said, and this is the other piece. I really thought this was powerful. When the first thing that when you're talking to a tribe, you might want to say is, I think we might have one of your children. Questions about ICWA? In terms of what's to include in your report? Keep going. And then finally, at this hearing, so now we're getting kind of towards the conclusion end of your report. Is there anything that you'd like to be addressed or resolved at this hearing? Are there any changes needed to any existing orders? We're recommending that visitations should go from unsupervised back down to monitored because blah, blah, blah happened, right? You're asking for a change in the court's order. Is there any reason for an early review? Right? So rather than waiting for the next 6 months to do your report or to have a hearing, is there a reason why you think the court should do a review earlier than that? And then finally, are there any changes needed to primary or secondary permanency plans? And then in your conclusion and recommendations, this is important. These two things are super important because the judges were commenting on this, and Tracy even mentioned it earlier. If you are making recommendations, please include and restate the why you are making that recommendation. It came up more than once in the judges' surveys that a lot of times they'll get requests from you all that they want to see change, that this needs to change or that needs to change, and they have no idea why you're making that request. And I would encourage you, even if you've already said it in the body, in this section, when you're doing your conclusion and kind of your wrap up, make your recommendation and say, and here's why. You don't need to go back into the full discussion, but just say, boom, boom. And then for any of you that have ever gone through my core training, you know this is my huge pet peeve. You are not allowed to use because it's in the child's best interest as the basis of your recommendation. I think the visit should be liberalized because it's in the child's best interest is not a reason. That's an opinion. I think visits should be liberalized because everybody agrees to this. It's a good idea. The kid wants more. Like, that's a reason. You've got to state your reason. Because it's in the child's best interest is not a reason. You can use it at the start of a sentence. Because it's in the child's best interest to do X, here's what I think we should do. Or I'm sorry, because it's in the child's best interest due to this factor, and this factor, here's my recommendation. But you are not allowed to use because it's in the child's best interest as justification for why you're asking for something.
Hey, Ryan, can I just get clarification on that?
Yes.
Are you saying it's okay to say, I believe it's in the child's best interest because X, Y, and Z?
Thank you. Yes, exactly.
Okay, but you're not allowed to say just conclusively, it's in the child's best interest.
Nope.
Okay.
I think visits should be terminated because it's in the child's best interest is not, no. And that's kind of it for my slideshow. Kind of rather dramatic ending, but there's a lot there, right? And so being able to prioritize, and this is where your program is going to help you to kind of be able to prioritize what's important, what does this judge need to know, what do they need to see, is going to be very helpful. And I wanted to give you guys this as a list of kind of things to think about as things that you might want to include in your report if it's important and if it's relevant to your case. What questions do you have about any of those items in that checklist? And I am working on a better checklist, but I just need to work on the formatting a little bit more. Nothing? Do you guys think this was helpful, useful? Things that you include in your reports that you want to make sure maybe you think everybody else should? Don't make me put you into breakout rooms.
Ryan, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So this order that you put it in where the recommendations are last, was that based on judge feedback? Or was it based on looking at other people's? I'm just wondering why that particular order, why the recommendations are last.
So a couple of reasons. one, judges like, that's your summary. That's basically your summary argument, right? Like, here's what I am saying needs to happen. I'm saying it's okay to include those in the body of your text, but the court really wants to know at the end, what are you asking me to do? And so putting those or even restating them at the end so that the court knows exactly what your expectations of them are is why we put that at the end.
Yeah, no, I get putting them separately. I was just wondering why at the end instead of the beginning. That was just my question.
That's the other reason.
On our court reports, they're at the beginning.
That's perfect too. And so some folks do both, like somewhere where they're all in one spot, whether it's at the beginning or at the end, that helps too, right? So, and if that's where your court reports are and that's what your judges are used to, keep them. I'm not saying change them, but just somewhere where they're all in one spot, because that one of the things that the judges said is, I hate having to dig through reports, your guys' reports, trying to figure out and piece together what you're asking me to do. I need it all in one spot, wherever it is.
Okay.
I agree, because in ours, it's the first thing.
Perfect.
And then there's like a recommendation, and then the next thing is a rationale, which is just like the high level rationale. And then the rest of the report is supposed to provide all the data that supports that.
And I've heard sometimes where courts will say, give me all of this, like lay it out, but just make sure it's somewhere. I need it all. Yeah. You know, whether it's at the beginning or the end. So. Thanks, John. All right. Well, as you guys are doing your reports and any feedback that you have, or you hear anything, let me know. This is a work in progress and we'll keep it updated, but thank you guys for listening to this and kind of sharing your feedback about it and kind of what works and not. And if you find something that works or doesn't work, or if the programs are all mad at you for putting stuff in your report that you shouldn't be putting in your report, tell them, oh, I got this from Ryan's training. You should talk to him. So they'll get a kick out of that. But all right. Well, hopefully we'll see you guys all this afternoon. I'm going to work on getting this posted up to YouTube, but have a great day and hopefully we'll see you later. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.